All right, my name is Nicole Lyons and welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. As you noted and probably saw before, we are using the Zoom webinar platform. A couple of ways, things to note about this platform are the ways in which that you can interact with us during this call today, which we highly encourage. We want to hear your comments. We want your questions. We would love as much interaction as possible on this virtual way we get to connect with you today. Along the bottom of your screen, you should notice two icons. One is the Q&A. So if you have a question at any point during our conversation, feel free to use that Q&A to connect with us, ask your question, and we will definitely get to it throughout our conversation today. And then also the chat. So you should see that chat icon. You can chat with us in a couple of ways. There is a little drop down, a little blue drop down. You can chat to everyone so that the whole group has the benefit of seeing your comment or responding to the question or insight that you have to share. Or you can communicate with us directly. You can communicate just to the host and the panelists or to us individually. So hopefully you can see those and feel free to use those, as I said, throughout the conversation and session today. All right, now that that's out of the way, I'm super excited to get started. As I mentioned, my name is Nicole. I'm from the Jorgensen Learning Center. I am joined by my colleague, Ray Jorgensen, and we have some really special guests here today. And I will let them introduce themselves, but first a little bit about JLC. If you don't know us yet, we are a team of learning professionals committed to supporting leaders to enhance the quality of their everyday leadership conversations, relationships, and results. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to tell us a little bit about himself and Rob and to introduce the Geixen organization.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So Rob and I are with an organization called Geixen, and at Geixen, we help organizations execute strategy with a focus on both process and people. The way we like to think about it is to execute strategy or drive any real transformational change, you need to do it with a focus with both hands, right? With one hand, paying attention to having the right strategic plan, the right measures, the right initiatives, those sorts of things. But equally important on the other hand, paying attention to people, right? So making sure that people are changing their behaviors, have the right capabilities, the right team dynamics, the right culture. And when you can do both those things in harmony with each other, that's when you see real results. So that's a bit about us and what we do.
Rob, tell us a little bit about from your perspective, add on to what Ryan said.
Well, I think Ryan says everything perfectly. I don't know how I could ever top that.
That's why I went first.
No, absolutely. I would literally be repeating him. The one key thing is the focus on really actually driving meaningful change, and that's really what motivates us. So
I really like that a lot, and the sense of meaningful change comes from how people start to shift and or change their behavior. And I love our relationship because the four of us have talked about that quite a bit. And I love that we're going to talk about strategy today and the components that you're going to give everyone. And those of you that are listening, welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you for taking one of the assets that you have in this century is your time. And you've taken some time to be with us. I'm so grateful for that. Thank you. And I think now, Nicole, what's our shifting point to this at this moment? Where do we go next?
We are actually going to hear a little bit more from Ryan. He's going to deliver our CPO, which you may know if you've attended a JLC webinar before, is our context, purpose, and outcome. I'm sure we'll talk about that more in the conversation today, but I'm going to invite Ryan to kind of let us know why this conversation is important and what we hope for you to gain as part of this conversation and hopefully what you can do afterwards.
Yeah, happy to. And you've taught us both a lot about CPOs, and I'm going to try to do it without being paying attention only to Rob's cat in the corner. But yeah, so.
What a show off, right? Like he's got a pose right there.
You cut it out. We're not supposed to be laughing. There's supposed to be like serious stuff here. Go ahead, Rob.
Camera boy. So yeah, so let's back up and set some context for the conversation, right? So, in our experience, many organizations have good strategies, a good idea of where they want to go over the long term, or even if it's something more specific, a really concrete piece of transformational change that they want to drive over the long term. But we've seen them struggle to get what they want out of it to achieve their intended results. And we've seen organizations across virtually every industry, private and public sector, face this, right? Organizations made up of experts in their industries with plenty of resources, and yet they continue to struggle and not get to where they need to be. And so what we want to talk about today are some of the elements that we've seen the best organizations excel in to be able to do that well, to be able to execute strategy and get the results out of it that they intended. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk through some of our experiences in those 5 areas. And our goal for today is to be able to share learnings, insights for each of these elements. Ideally, we'll get through all 5, but we'll spend time where it's most valuable. Hopefully we'll have some good discussion from the attendees as well. And from my perspective, it'll be a successful use of time if folks are able to leave this session with some new ideas, right? Some new ideas and thoughts on how they can address some of the challenges that they're seeing today. So you can see the 5 up on the screen. I won't read through them because we'll get into them in plenty of detail. But that's what we're trying to get out of today.
Very nice. And those of you that are listening, I want you to just think for yourselves, what did those words mean to you? Anytime you're working in this arena with us, with Geixen and JLC, we're constantly trying to make sure that the words we use, which are linear, are understood. So I'll start with you, Nicole. What did you hear Ryan say, and what did that mean to you?
Yeah, what I heard Ryan say that really stood out to me is this place where we get stuck, right? Our strategies, as you saw by the way we named this event, is people get stuck in that place where they don't know how to move forward. And I think what we've collectively, what I heard from Ryan and what we've collectively talked about is that it's this enmeshing between the strategy and the elements of our culture that will really help us to move forward. And so I think that's just such an exciting prospect to think about, all right, what's holding us back? And is it the strategy? Is it the culture? Is it a combination of both? Is it how we're proceeding through as leaders, how we're leading through as leaders? So I'm just really excited to get into that kind of conversation today so we can share some insights and hopefully help those who have joined us today to have a better sense of how they can move forward and drive their strategy in a way that considers both the people and the business goals.
Very nice, very nice. And Rob, something to add to that, please.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always like to emphasize is that, at the end of the day, as Ryan said, it comes down to those 5 elements and the ones we're going to talk through about throughout this session. And all the tools and frameworks and processes and structures and so on and so forth that people use are ultimately designed to accomplish one or more of those 5 elements. And so I always think it's useful to make sure that we maintain that in the back of our mind so that we're focused on the right thing. The tool, the template, the framework is not the goal. It's achieving those 5 outcomes.
I love it. I just love that, Rob. And those of you that are listening, think about culture. Conceptually, culture is like the landscape. This is how we live every day. This is the kind of the unwritten rules of how we show up and behave. And I love this connection to, here's 5 ways to really think about unsticking our strategies and getting them to move forward. That was really beautiful. Thank you. Ryan, you are up again. Take us through number 1.
All right, so let's start with focus, because that's kind of where it all begins, right? And so focus, to me, what that means is we've made clear choices about what we want to achieve over the long term. And I find in today's world, with so much changing around us in the environment, both externally and internally, and with so many seemingly opportunities to go take advantage of, focus is really hard. And it's really easy sort of in the early days of figuring out what the change is going to be and what the strategy is going to be, to say, we want to do it all, right? And there's how could we not want to accomplish all of these great things? We have great people, great skills. These are all the things that are going to take us to the next level. and it's really hard to decide what not to do, right? There's that old saying that strategy is all about choosing what not to do. And only once you get into it do you often figure out what you really have the bandwidth or the capabilities to take on. I mean, I remember a story, we were working with an organization that had historically had a lot of trouble prioritizing initiatives, right? And so part of the problem was that it could be found sort of outside of the traditional process. The other problem was people's time was really the more scarce resource, and they didn't really have an easy way of looking at that, right? So we just happen to know anecdotally that these people are busy, but we don't really have any way of tracking if they're truly overloaded or not. And so for them, it was really all about having a more established and structured way to have those conversations, right? It couldn't just be gut feel, we can do these 5 things or these 10 things. It was about putting more of a framework around it so that they had a firmer cut line, if you will, right? We can't go above or, this amount of dollars or this amount of hours for people's time. And so while that can help from a process perspective, it really helped from a cultural perspective as well to say, we really need to make choices around what not to do in addition to just throwing more onto the pile. And so it's like we said at the beginning with the 2 hands analogy, process can help to encourage those discussions, but it's very much a mindset shift as well.
I love that sense of a mindset shift, because there are certain to-dos that I believe are impact to-dos that'll help you accomplish your structure. And if you're not clear on the impact to-dos, I start getting everything done. And to Dr. Deming's point from years ago, he called that making working. I got a lot to do, so I'm doing it, and I'm distracting myself rather than focusing on the impact to-dos that will make the strategy come to fruition. Mm-hmm. Rob, please add into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And because, so there's 2 levels, right? The focus, first of all, is where are we going to put our strategic cultural attention? And again, it is easy for organizations to conflate what is important with what actually needs their attention. And the problem is if you end up with, oh, here's our 8 strategic pillars, and these are all 8 things that we think are really important, you don't have the focus you need to help guide behavioral change, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. And then if you bring it down a level beyond this high level strategic, what am I trying to accomplish? It's ultimately, if you're trying to drive behavior change, you're trying to drive strategic change, you're impacting how people spend their time and energy. What am I doing with my day? And that typically shows up in terms of projects or initiatives, tasks. And that's the other level at which, if you haven't sufficiently focused at the strategic level, you're generally in trouble when it gets to the task level, because there's just too many things to do, especially when, by and large, strategic change is something that is layered on top of people's day jobs. And so nobody has spare time in their day jobs, let alone time to take on 8 initiatives on the strategic side. And an example of a good example of sort of perforce getting to focus came out of a large pharma client of ours, where the leader of this group, called me up and said, we have an initiative overload problem. We're working on too many things, so we need to filter it down. And how many initiatives are you working on? I said 38. I said, yeah, you got an initiative overload problem. I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar organization, so they got lots of resources. It's still too many. So I worked with the team, and I think we got it down to like 13. And I'm like, geez, I don't know. It still feels like a lot. Oh, no, we can do it. And, 6 months later, he calls me up and says, yeah, we still haven't made any progress on any of those 13, And so we went back around and filtered it down. And I think we got it to like 7. And the team wasn't comfortable with it. But they're like, well, these are the ones we're mandated to do. And so we've got to do these. Like, I can't cut anything else. These are the ones that corporate has said we have to do. All right, so fine, let them go. And then I checked him back in later, and he goes, he laughs. He says, yeah, we couldn't get 7 done either. So what he decided to do is he just threw the whole thing out and he picked 1. Just picked 1 of the 7. He did the 1. He got it up, he got it running, he got it moving. And once he was sure adding another initiative wasn't going to kill it, wasn't going to kill the momentum of that, wasn't going to overburden the people, he added a second one. And I think he got up to 3 before he said, okay, that's it. That's all we can do. But they actually got those 3 done. And then were able to work their way down the list and do the other 4 in the top 7, so on and so forth, much faster because he really radically focused the organization. So I just think that is a good example.
I love it. So there's distraction all the time, everywhere.
Right.
And this is a way to think. Focus is a way to think about how do I deal with all the distractions so that I can do the impact behaviors that will carry us forward. And I know, Nicole, you waved at me and you moved your scarf, therefore you have questions. So what are some of the questions that are unfolding?
Yes. So actually a really, really great insight from one of our participants shared at a deeper level beyond culture is the story that each employee is living within. The mistake that leaders make in attempting to achieve alignment is not discovering that story and understanding how the new strategy, a story, affects each staff member's story. The problem here is thinking mechanicalistically, I probably didn't say that right, about strategy and not organically. I think that resonated with me so much because in the large scale changes that I've been through, I mean, change happens at the individual level. And whether or not I believe the strategy or the change is a good idea for the organization, it still impacts me in some personal way. Whether I've had time to process or my sense of perceived loss for what that means for me, if I haven't had time to really work through that, how can I really move forward and adopt this change? So what's each individual's story and how do we connect that back to the organization's story? That was really great. And then yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that's really good. Rob?
I was going to double click on that. I think that is a really good point. We always talk about how at the end of the day, organizations don't change. The individuals within the organization change. Right? And if you can align, coordinate, they motivate the change of the individuals, then the organization moves. But it is only through that, connection to the individual, the personal. And again, that, you do need the mechanical part of it. Otherwise, people don't necessarily know what to do. But you also need that organic part. And again, I think that's why we think of it as the process and the people side of things. So great point.
One of my teachers taught me that all meaningful and long-lasting change starts on the inside and works its way out. So that sense of telling a different story, I mean, the stories that we tell ourselves today capture us in our current reality. We almost have to learn to tell a new story. Ryan, how are we doing on focus right now?
I'm loving what I'm hearing. I mean, the thought that's spurring for me, what you just said, Ray, is it's easiest to change when people really understand what it means for me, the WIFM, right? The what does it mean for me? And unless I understand what it means for me personally and how I'm supposed to change as a result of it, I don't really have a shot at contributing to it. I mean, I can think of situations in past lives where, I understand what the organization is trying to do or what this bigger picture change means, but I don't really know how I fit into it. And it's through a one-way communication, like a town hall or something like that. And without a deeper conversation around what do I need to do about it? What does my team need to do about it? It's really hard for me to actually contribute to it.
Beautifully stated. And I'm watching the notes come in. You have a 4-star admiral that has weighed in on this. You've got a legendary, supremely decorated superintendent of schools that has weighed in. You've got people from so many different places weighing in. Another comment on this one before we shift to number 2 that has come in, Nicole.
Yes, a question came in. What should teams do to focus when the leadership will not prioritize?
Great question.
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, one thought I have off the top of my head is, so I saw one of the other comments that talked about fragmentation of efforts, right? And so that if I went back to my leader and said, I've heard these different, maybe even competing priorities in some cases, my options are I can do these 5 things in a potentially suboptimal way, or you need to help me and tell me what are the 1 or 2 things that you want done first. And so making it an explicit conversation around, again, putting some structure behind it, the tip that we talked about earlier around not making it a gut feel conversation, putting in, no one has more than 24 hours in a day, at least that I know of. And so making it a more explicit conversation around, these are the 5 priorities that you've told me to do in that example. This is the amount of time that I have, relative to other things that I'm working on. Help guide me on what you think I should do and what you think you need to get done. And make that a constant conversation, over communicate it.
Yeah, over communication and conversation. Notice where Ryan immediately pivoted to a space that we believe in deeply. The conversation is the relationship. If I'm not in conversation with my direct report, then I'm going to guess, and I won't have safe enough space to really talk about it. Rob, please weigh in on this one.
Yeah, I literally was going to go the same place. The challenges, of course, is when organizations don't prioritize, leaders don't prioritize, and you're in an organization, you're sort of at the whim of whatever they're focusing on at the moment. And so they give you 5 things to focus on, and so you start working on one, and then they go, where the hell's this other thing that you were supposed to be working on? And we'll get right on that. And they come back and they to the first thing. And, obviously it's part of the reason why nothing ultimately gets driven. But that's why, as you said, Ray, and as Ryan was talking about, the importance of communication. Say, okay, here's what I'm hearing. Here's the 5 things you want me to do. This is the one I'm going to do first, second, third. Let me know. This is not the right order. I'm happy to I know I got to do them all, but this is the order I'm doing them in. This is what I'm focusing on first, second, third. Does that work for you? Yes, no, why not? Great, super. Doesn't mean they're not going to change the priorities later, but at least you've had a conversation that says, this is where I started. And now they know they're changing the thing they agreed on.
Oh, that's super. That's really super. The constancy of purpose around the work that you guys are doing, and that we bring a little bit of ourselves to. Effective leaders generate and sustain quality relationships. And the more we have that, the more the opportunity will unfold that we can talk about hard stuff. Yeah. One of the things that Nicole has seen me do on calls and so also working with clients is, what's hard to talk about? What's something really hard to talk about right now? And one of those things might be, holy crap, I got too much to do. And I feel like you keep giving me more to do, as though, to Ryan's point, the strategy is piled on top of my day-to-day work, rather than becoming part of what I'm trying to do to enable success for the system. So before we go to number 2, any other comment, Nicole?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of wonderful comments there in the chat that I'll let people kind of scroll through and read for themselves. I think we answered all of the questions, so I think we're good to move forward. Excellent. Into our second topic.
Ryan, number 2.
All right, so we're moving along a journey here, right? So let's imagine the focus element has been addressed sufficiently at this point in time. And now the next step is to make sure that everyone's on the same page and moving in the same direction and rowing in the same direction, right? So that's all about, that's what alignment's about. Right, and so it's much easier said than done, right? The question is not only do people understand what, let's say in an example, there are 3 strategic priorities. Do they have the same understanding of what it means, right? Because if it's too broad, it could be left open to interpretation. Another story I can think of is we worked with a manufacturing organization where they had recently brought in a couple new senior leaders at the C-suite level. And they were rock stars. They were rock star individual leaders. They were driving a lot of change really fast, really well in each of their respective areas. But the problem was that they weren't talking to each other about it, right? In some cases, they were driving change that overlapped with some other areas. And in the worst cases, may have even been competing with what the others were trying to accomplish. The analogy I like to use is they had a stable of really strong, fast horses, but they were pulling the carriage in different directions. And when you have strong, fast horses, that's even worse than if they were less strong and less fast, I guess, in that example. And so the way that the leader addressed this is really refocus the team on shared decision-making, right? No more making, at least the highest level of decision in a vacuum, right? They refocused their leadership time that they spent together around making those decisions together and understanding where are the interdependencies, where are the overlaps, how is this going to impact what you're trying to accomplish over there? And And they made that a really irregular part of their DNA, and it really changed the way that they operated for the better. But that's always the challenge, is making sure that people, not only do they understand what the priorities are, but do they really have the same understanding of what it means for them.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah,
Rob, I know you
yeah,
know
I
who
think-
he's talking about too.
I do. I do exactly. I do exactly. Yeah. The other piece I want to talk about is that, you know, we'll talk about these 5 elements, and they're obviously all essential, and they're not discrete. There's interrelationships between them. And so often organizations feel like, oh, we've got focus, you know, we're customer centric or some broad term like that. And then you go around and you talk to each of the leaders, and they have a completely different sense of what that means, and what do I do as a result of that. So as you develop focus within the organization and you make those strategic choices, in order to ensure you have alignment, get tactical. Think about what is something we would actually invest in. What is something we would stop doing as a result of this focus? How will we know we're doing it right? What are we measuring? How do we, you know, and if you can start answering those questions and people have the same answers, then you're actually getting both focus and alignment. But if they're talking about, oh, I would measure customer centricity in this way, and I'd measure it this other way, then you start to expose that lack of alignment. So even if you agree on 40,000 foot version, can you take it down and talk about some specific examples of what you tactically would do differently tomorrow in order to drive that change? And that's where you see true alignment.
Yeah, like what will I do right now to make this shift inside of me?
Yep.
And again, back to those stories we tell ourselves, can I make this shift given my current story about self and how I fit into the organization? You guys are magnificent. What's popping up for us up there, Madam Nicole?
Yeah, just a lot of additional support for everything that's being said. I think the idea of the, you know, challenging aspects of focus is that people often think it's on top of their regular work, and creating those connections between what I'm doing every day and what that big picture strategic vision is for the organization has to occur. And so some comments here, you know, alignment comes from developing a common understanding within the system. And I think for me, what's coming up is where that really happens, that development of focus, that development of alignment is in those everyday leadership conversations.
Yeah.
So it's in those meetings that we're having. It's why creating focus is so important, even in the conversations that we have one-on-one or with our teams on a daily basis. It's because that's how we can create that constant touch point back to that strategic vision. And if I'm doing things in my day-to-day that don't align, I should have the safe space to be able to say, I think we're doing things that maybe don't align with our strategic priorities. But how often does that occur? And how often do people have that kind of space within the organization?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Gentlemen, anything that we're missing? And by the way, thank you for the stories. The stories make things real. And you have already done this. I watched you do this with a group. I had the privilege of being in the room when you created a strategic picture for a group of people. And what you did is you began with the end in mind. What is the end state? And then what would be evidence that we got there? We don't have that conversation. And to your point about common understanding, I cannot tell you how many meetings I've been into. The meeting ends and they go, are there any questions? Nobody says anything except the one guy that always talks, right? And that means we really don't have common understanding. We have personal meaning that we've developed. And if we're lucky, maybe shared meaning with a couple of people, but the common understanding gets lost. That's really brilliant, man. Anything you want to say finally on this little piece from Guyson?
The one thing I would double click on, and I think this very much plays into your area in terms of effective leadership, is in some cases, leaders within an organization have a vested interest in keeping things vague because they don't like the way the decisions are going. And so they know if they can obfuscate or they can keep things high level, they still have a chance to be able to retrade on the decision down the road. And that's where it's obviously critical for strong effective leaders to be able to stay true to those decisions, not allow the back channel, the hallway conversations that causes people to then break out of alignment again.
That's beautiful, beautiful. One of my
Yeah.
story teachers used to say, "Well, I have these values, I have these operating principles," and he said, "I thought everybody understood them until I went and had lunch out in the field." And I said, "What are my values? What are the operating principles? How many are there?" They had no idea. No idea. They'd seen it on a memo. It was put on. They put it on a poster. But when you sat down and had a conversation about it, no resonance at all. Final thoughts on this one, Rye?
Yeah, I guess a couple of the comments that I'm seeing, right? Feedback loop helps us check alignment. Common language is important, but not enough, right? It's all about meaning. And that really resonates with me because it ties back to what we were talking about in the focus discussion, is that communication and over communication is so important, and not just formal communication, but informal communication, making sure that, again, not just language is understood, but the true meaning behind it is understood. And so that's building in something like a feedback loop as a formal way to be doing that is great.
Produces awareness. One of the things we need desperately as leaders is awareness. Do I actually have a sense of what's going on in the house? Do I have a sense of what's going on in the enterprise? Beautifully stated, gentlemen. Anything else before we move to number 3, Nicole?
I think we're good. Let's move forward.
Ryan, you're on. And we got about 15 minutes left.
All right, I'll run through this one. So the next step, right? So we're focused. We've made choices. We're all on the same page about what we mean. The next step is to hold the organization, our teams, and even ourselves accountable for achieving intended results, right? And this one is a lot easier said than done. And again, it comes back to both being there are process ways to do it, right? There are ways that you can measure people's performance, measure the team's performance, but a lot of it is mindset shift as well, making sure that people understand that it's about having the team's collective best interests in mind, not just about, shaming someone for being off track, as a for instance. Another story I can think of, because I like using stories to illustrate the point, is I had a past client who they had established their strategy, and they were in the really early days of reviewing progress against it. They had monthly meetings, I believe, to review progress against their strategic objectives. And they had specific owners on their leadership team to report out progress against them. And they were at the very first one, and each of the individuals got up there and they stood up and said, mine's green. They were using this traffic light system for green is on track, yellow is at risk, and red is off track. And everyone got up there. They said, we're doing great. We're green. We're making tons of progress against this. And I remember the leader at the end of the meeting stood up and said, we either picked the wrong targets or we picked the wrong strategy. And he said it with he said it with a smile on his face. And that's not to say it's impossible that they would be on track in their early days, but this group of people have been working together long enough, and they knew the challenges in front of them that it just wasn't the case. And so it was very much a culture at the time of no one wanting to stand up there and say my thing is red or off track. And so a big focus for them was just shifting that mindset to red is good, right? Red is not about shaming or saying that you are personally, undervalued or have less worth. It's about raising the flag to say that all of us are responsible for this together, and I'm the one that's responsible for raising it for discussion so that we can solve the problem and make sure that we can move forward together. So a big part of them was just changing the mindset to be a bit more honest. And that helped them. Once they got past the individual concerns, they were able to be more transparent with each other.
And vulnerable, it sounds like. Rob,
yes,
how about that
absolutely.
one?
Yeah, so let me just, another thing I want to highlight, but let me just double click on that. I think one of the shifts we find useful is if people recognize themselves, that's something, a metric they're tracking, for example, the red thing, not as being responsible per se, but actually as being the advocate on behalf of the organization for that element, right? So it being red, it doesn't, as Ryan talked about, reflect personal failure, even if it's something that's inherent to my division. It reflects a way we in the organization are falling short, and it is my responsibility to raise. All right, and that's most strategic things often are cross organizational, less just something that can be solved by one person in the organization. The other thing I want to do is I step back and I frame what we're doing here in general. Your strategy sets out sort of like obviously where I want to go and how I think I'm going to get there, right? It's the things we talk about. We're focused on this, we're aligned, we're pulling in the same direction. In order then actually to drive that change, you place bets, right? Strategy execution ultimately is about the disproportionate allocation of resources. I'm going to take my scarce resources, whether it's dollars or time or leadership attention, and I'm going to give it to the initiative that Nicole's leading rather than one that Ryan's leading, because we as a group feel like that's the way we're going to achieve our strategic goals, right? But that's a bet, right? That's our best guess at this moment in time on how we're going to create value faster than we would otherwise. And the goal of accountability is to say, hey, were we right? Was that hypothesis correct? Because I don't care how good your strategy is. I don't care how brilliant you are at creating a great strategy. The second you've written it down, it starts to become obsolete. And so you need to be constantly checking in on it and holding yourselves accountable to, did the bet I make, was it the right thing to give the money to the initiative that Nicole was advocating rather than when Ryan was advocating? Did it generate the results I'm expecting? And the last thought on that is people often hold themselves accountable to, is it on time and is it on budget? Those are important, but the critical piece, is it on benefit? Is it achieving the end result I'm trying to achieve from a strategic perspective?
Okay, love it, love it, love it. And I notice Nicole's wiggling over there. You got some questions and comments, young lady?
Yeah, some great comments and questions coming in. Some desire to give greater explanation, which I think you actually just got into, about explaining how strategy becomes execution. So I think you were right there, Rob and Ryan, with your comments. I think we kind of answered that one. The other one is alignment has within it the assumption that we're asking for a one-way contract. Staff changes and aligns themselves to the story that leaders have presented. Once again, what is the highest story that the staff could be living? What are they individually called to? Does leadership know these stories? Have they encouraged staff to live their highest story and figured out how these stories integrate with the larger story for the company? So I wanted to give you a chance to sort of react to that comment.
Yeah, how do I bring my best self, my best story to the strategy? That's really beautiful. What a great comment. Gentlemen, what are you guys thinking?
Yeah, I love a lot of those thoughts. And so a few thoughts. So in many cases, yes, the vision or the strategy is set from the top down. And the first step is, you go communicate that out to your people and broader teams. But in the best situations, it's a circular loop, right? So strategy may be set from the top down, but it's actually executed from the bottom up, right? It's the jobs of everyone in the organization to go make those things happen. And through their experiences, they're going to be able to share, here's what's working and here's what's not working based on what we've seen. And if the loop goes back to the top, the best leaders are able to take that as feedback on a continuous basis to be able to change things if they're not working, right? So it's not a set it and forget it, everyone go execute it. It's, here's our best guess at this point in time. You tell us what you think that means for you. And after a few cycles of running with it, how you think it's going. And ideally, it's a constant conversation of being able to shift it over time, right? The way that we think about it is the strategy is never set in stone. It's always set in clay, right? And so it's always able to be molded.
Hopefully we can do that. Rob, what are you thinking?
Yeah. I think Ryan said it well. I want to make sure that we get a chance to get through the other ones. I don't want to just repeat what he's saying, but it can't be said enough, the importance of engaging and enrolling the individuals, in the vision. So
one of the leaders that we have, before you go, Nicole, said that in terms of feedback, how can somebody in the organization accelerate an issue to a stage or a level where it can be solved? Because sometimes things are presented, and if accountability is my brand, I will try and solve this right here, right now, in my day-to-day work with the team I'm on. I'll try and solve it. Sometimes you can't. You may not have the resources to solve it at that level. So the point that I thought Ryan made beautifully, it is a feedback loop that can accelerate issues that are not solvable at the deck plate up to a level where they can be solved. I thought that was really brilliant from both of you. What else you got, Nicole?
Yeah, a question here. Can you discuss the process? And Ray, I think you'll have great insight on how to maybe infuse some of this into the meetings that you hold. Can you discuss the process for developing shared vision and strategy and outcomes? Not the leader sharing the vision, but the vision for the work comes from the vision or mental models from everyone, understanding there's a bottom line, more revenue, higher grad rates, higher scores on rubrics, whatever that might be.
Love it. Yeah. I'll let you guys go first, and then I'll add my old 2 cents at the end. So Ryan, what are you thinking about that?
Yeah. So I'll just jump in as well. I think it's a great question, because I think the truth of the matter is often the best answers come from within and not just from above. And so there needs to be that the back and forth. I know one client we worked with, the key solution came not from the leader, not from the division head, not from the, all it actually came from somebody who was part of the shipping team, and sort of was out there in the field doing distribution, and actually was seeing what were the inherent challenges that their customers were facing. And so, again, there is that back and forth. You obviously can't just have everybody do what they they envision as the right answer without any kind of alignment or focus. But you absolutely need to engender that dialogue, that conversation that brings it out of everybody.
Love it. Love it.
Just the real quick thing I would add. Yeah, the real quick thing I would add to that is the best strategies that I've seen are ones that have been co-developed, not only by fellow leaders, but with input from folks at all levels of the organization. And yes, in often cases, at the end of the day, it is the senior most team's job to make the final decision. But it works so much better when you're able to collect input along the way, really as a way to build buy-in, right? I feel like I was heard. I can see this piece of our ideas or my team's ideas showing up in this part of the strategy. And it really increases the odds that people are going to commit to it.
Yeah, that's beautifully stated. Though, and the person asked the question, I don't know who it is, and I'll give you how I have played with this, and our team has played with this. A vision isn't just a sentence or a couple of sentences. It's a combination of things. It's a combination of our core mission and core values. That's your ideology. My ideology, core vision, core values. And then a very, very, and I'm stealing from Boris on this one, a very, very vivid description of the future. That gives you your big, hairy, audacious goals. When you blend action and ideology, you have a vision. One without the other, not useful, because we end up talking about something and talking about our values without connecting them to our very, very vivid description of the future. With those in mind, all of a sudden, I now have a picture that people can tag into and place their own sense of accomplishment in there. And back to Ryan's comment, we were doing some work on an article by Forbes which said, effective leaders make accountability their personal brand, their personal brand. I want to make sure if I make a promise, I deliver it in the best interest of my team or clients. I mean, there's just such power in what you guys are saying. Thank you. I think we're ready for number 4, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Ryan.
All right, let's keep moving. So all right, the next stage in the journey is where we've touched on some of this, but this is really where we start to get into the individual and people side of things, right? So again, we've made choices, we're on the same page, we're holding each other accountable. Are people actually starting to change their behavior in ways that are going to support this broader change, right? And this is a really tricky one. And I know that someone said earlier, right? I think Rob said, organizations aren't made up of processes and systems and frameworks. They're made up of people. And so until you can get people to actually understand how they fit in and how they shift their behaviors, the strategy is just a bunch of words on a piece of paper. Right. I mean, I can think of several examples where this was true, but one comes to mind where the organization had a good idea of where it wanted to go, right? But their environment was dictating what they needed to do, right? So markets were flat or declining, requires them to be really aggressive with change and really innovative and to try new things and to take risks, right? I'm sure a lot of people in different industries or contexts could share a similar story along those lines. And in this particular case, the organization's culture was historically incredibly conservative and risk averse. And so they had the right strategy and they couldn't understand, why aren't we getting there? Why aren't people actually, doing the things we think we need to do? And the thing about behavior change is it's both at an individual level, but it's also at an organization level too. And so for them, until they started to address the fact that their culture wasn't supportive of the strategy and they needed to do real things to start to change that, they didn't see the results they wanted to see. And it could be things as small as just making the environment a bit more welcoming for the types of behaviors that you want to see, right? So in that example where you want to see more innovation, right?
Yeah.
Rewarding people for failing fast, right? Maybe having your process for new ideas or new business cases, maybe it's a bit less stringent, right? We just want to get more ideas on the table and we want to go try new things so that we can learn. Maybe it's the targets that you're setting, right? We're accepting that over the near term, it's not going to be all about profits, revenues, and whatnot. This is going to be about learning. And so you can make subtle shifts like that from a process perspective. Again, it all comes back to both sides, right? It's both about process, but also shifting the mindset to be able to say, okay, this really is actually a welcoming environment to actually move my behavior over there.
Yeah. So if you have established a space that is truly safe, I could come to the three of you and say, I did this. I was doing it to the best of my ability. Didn't work. It just didn't work. And I'll tell you what I did, and maybe you can give me some coaching on what I might do differently. But if it's not safe, I will wait and blame somebody. Generally, I try and blame IT. Everybody blames IT. So I'll blame IT. They did it. They didn't give me enough resource, right? So rather than do that, if the culture is such that I can actually come forward and say to you, Ryan, it didn't work. It didn't work. Rob, it didn't work. That all of a sudden I have a very different set of interactions. Rob, what are you thinking right now?
Yeah, I think obviously that's great. And it's funny, in a prep conversation, I happened to throw the quote out too, right? But it's what the Thomas Edison's favorite statement when he was accused of having done 10,000, trying to develop the light bulb, 10,000 failed experiments. And he reportedly said, it's not that I've failed 10,000 times. It's that I have successfully discovered 10,000 ways that don't work.
Beautiful.
Right? And that is inevitably what you're trying to do, quite frankly, in life, not just in drive strategy.
I love it. As long as we don't delude ourselves, because sometimes when we talk to ourselves, we say, oh, no, it should have worked. I love it. So back to that. So your comments before on that one, Rob, were just beautiful. Yeah. I see you waving at me, Nicole. What do you got?
Yeah, just monitoring the exchange back and forth in the chat here. And I think there's some really great comments if you have a chance to take a look at them, but also I think the crux of it is how do we handle resistance to change within the organization?
Yeah. So that's actually where I was going to go too. So, the fascinating thing is if you're trying to unstick your strategy, what you're trying to do is actually drive change, right? And all of strategy execution is really about driving change. It's about doing something differently tomorrow in order to create a different result. And of course, as humans, we know that people hate to change, right? Even if they know that change is good for them, even if, and I'm sure we've all faced this, people in our organizations who have complained for 20 years about, why do we do it this way? We should do it this other way. And finally somebody listens and says, okay, we're going to do it this way now. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. That means I have to learn a new system or a new way of doing things. So, I think it's critical. A couple of thoughts on this. Organizations, when they try to drive change, they tend to think, or let me say leaders, tend to think from their perspective. and they sort of say, this is look at all the great, the benefits and so on and so forth, right? And they too, rather than doing, as people have mentioned in the chat here, actually understanding where people are at, right? Where are people really sitting when they hear about this change, and how do they think about what it means for them, right? What the implications are for them. And so you need to speak to people where they truly are at and how they are truly going to hear this. And the other thing is, one of my other favorite expressions in this is, as you try to drive change, you need to be in a robust relationship with reality. And as you drive change, it's not going to be positive for everybody. It's not, generally, it's not. It's really unusual that a change is something that everybody's going to love and it's sunshine and flowers and so on and so forth. And so you talk about these great, oh, it's going to be fabulous for the organization. No one's fooled by that, right? No one's fooled by that. They understand, oh, we do that. That means, you know, my budget's going to go down, my team's going to get smaller, whatever, so on and so forth, right? And so you need to be able to speak to that honestly, address it. And by the way, the last thought on this is, and I know you keep saying this as well, is communicate, because people don't fill silence with hope and optimism. They fill it with, you know, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and they will absolutely assume the worst.
Beautifully stated, beautifully stated. Ryan, anything to add to what Rob said?
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add from an execution standpoint, like let's assume that you have some people that understand how they're supposed to change. Change doesn't happen. Large transformational change doesn't happen overnight, and so that's a really big one. Is the way I can think about it is organizations don't take a hard left turn. They make that turn with lots of really small nudges along the way. So you will still get from here to here by making, you know, dozens, hundreds of small incremental changes to get you there.
I love it, Ryan. My last comment on this is a strategy, tactic, and effort that I've used in multiple places. So if I said to the three of you, tell me what is a significant change that happened in your life where after that event, things were different for you. Well, people say, I got married, I got divorced, we had a kid, I lost someone in my family. They'll tell me all kinds of things, right? At that moment, I stop the conversation and say, what were the skill sets, capabilities, and characteristics you needed to develop in order to successfully deal with this life-changing event? And sometimes they're not something I really expected, but it is absolutely something I need to do. And all of a sudden it shifts into something very real. So now you have this change in the organization. What characteristics do you already have in you and available that can assist you in moving forward? All too often we try and, to your point, oh, Rob, that was beautiful. Let me explain to you why this is freaking wonderful, and maybe not to me, right? So then how do we shift to that other place? For sake of time, I think we have one more to do, don't we, Ryan?
Yep.
Yeah, let's take us home. We could easily spend all day talking about any one of these, I'm sure.
I agree.
Let's take us to the last one. So the last one is all about learning, right? And so we have the strategy, we're moving in the same direction. People are changing their behaviors over the long term, right? Because we're thinking about big transformational change. This isn't a month-long thing, it's a 5-year thing. Are we able to effectively apply lessons learned moving forward, right? This is a hard one. I mean, there's a term that we use called shelfware, where a lot of organizations they go off to these fabulous workshops and they solve all the world's problems. They come home and communicate and put the strategy on a poster or put it on a shelf, and they check back in a year later and they wonder, why things haven't changed. And so, just another quick story is we worked with a healthcare company who they got themselves down to 3 strategic priorities out of potential 10 or 15 or so, which was great for them. And they had a good process. They had some cycles to be able to check in on progress and see where are our metrics, what have we learned along the way. And they had a bunch of cycles. This was the opposite of that green problem where they were red, right? They were off track, and they had good conversation around, honest conversation around the fact that they were off track. And each cycle, they thought, "Oh, we just need to do things a little bit differently, and we'll get there, right? We just need to tweak this, and then next quarter we'll be back on track." And it took them a full year, if not more, of continuing to focus on those three things in the same way with minor adjustments until they realized they had to make more drastic changes. And so what they ended up doing was they got rid of one of them and cut the overall number down from 3 to 2. For the 2 that they kept, they drastically revisited the scope even within those 2, right? Wow. This one thing is too much for us. We need to do this thing first, this thing second, this thing third, defer that thing entirely. And the point is, it took them a long time to come to that realization. And so the learning for me coming out of that is, don't be bound to previous decisions. Don't be afraid to kill long running or existing projects. Don't be afraid to do things differently if you feel like you're not getting there. And the faster you can do it, the better, right? No one ever says we made that change too early.
I love it. I love it. The ability to embrace something, enroll in something, is different than tolerating it, right? I tolerate mosquitoes, right? I don't like them, and I'm not going to embrace the mosquito, right? That language, even the language we say to ourselves, can create something odd in terms of the capability to change and produce a strategy that will get you to the end state. That's beautiful. Rob.
Yeah, a couple of quick thoughts. One is again, we talked about strategy execution being the disproportionate allocation of resources. You hold yourself accountable. It's critical you learn from that. I placed a bet. Did I get the result I wanted to? Why or why not? Otherwise, what you end up with is a series of fire and forgets. Oh, we're doing this. And then it stops being productive. And maybe people keep working on it for years, even though nobody's asking about it anymore. Or it just sort of fades away. And that's where you truly waste resources. Having invested resources in something and having it not work isn't the problem. Not learning from that is the problem. And so I think that's really critical, is that make sure that you learn from everything you've decided to focus on. The last quick thing I want to jump in on is we separate content, which is the decisions you made. I've invested in this, I've invested in that, and process, which is the way in which you make those decisions, and then hold yourselves accountable for those. As you're trying to learn, pay attention to both aspects. Did I make the right choices? And if I'm not making the right choices, how do I need to adjust my process to get there? So those are just the other piece I want to throw in there.
That was just fantastic. You guys have really captured the essence of our conversation today. I know we're running way over, so I need to turn to Nicole so she can put us back in under some kind of rein, so we do a better job.
It's our fault this time, Ray, not yours.
No, I think this conversation has been amazing, and the engagement we've had in the chat here, back and forth, people sharing ideas with each other, insights with each other, asking great questions. One question we had at the end here, I think obviously we don't have time to dig into it, but how do leaders come to know the climate and culture of the organization? I think that's a perfect segue into what we have to offer for you. JLC and Geigen are partnering together to invite each of you, everyone who's registered for this webinar, to join us in a joint consultation. We're offering a complimentary joint consultation with both of our organizations where we can talk about things just like that. It's not a sales pitch. We're not going to get online and try and sell you anything. It is genuinely an opportunity to connect with our organizations, bring your real challenge. You want to know more about how to look at your culture and see what kind of culture and climate you've got going on. If you want to look and see where you might be stuck in your strategy and how you might be able to shift and move forward, take advantage of this offer. I'm putting right now in the chat a link where you can go and you can sign up for that offer. It's a very simple form you can fill out. Just let us know a little bit about yourself so we know how to reach you, and someone from our organizations will be reaching out with you to schedule that conversation. So we invite each and every one of you to take advantage of this opportunity to connect with us, to have more conversation like this, specific to you, specific to your organization, where you can ask us questions and we can consult with you live. Anything to add to that, Ryan or Rob or Ray?
We'll even make sure the cat's there.
Yes, that's a deal breaker right there, Rob. I want the cat on the line.
I want to tell you how grateful I am to the three of you and to the developing relationship we have with Geixen. This has been fantastic, and I look forward. You can see the comments. People enjoyed this tremendously because you spoke about real stuff and you use stories. And the other thing that the old guy will always do is call bullshit. Bullshit, that's not really true. Come on, let's talk about this real. So this is a really powerful way for us to move forward. And those of you that are listening, please hop on that link. If you really want to talk about what your challenges are, I promise we won't judge you. Okay, we just want to have a real conversation to move ourselves forward. Let's check out. Best thing about this conversation from your standpoint was, Rob?
The engagement of the participants. Absolutely tremendous amount of conversation going on in the chat. It was really great to see. Really very, very much. Thank you guys for being such active participants.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you. Ryan, best thing.
That was what I was going to say. You let him go first, but just to build on it. I mean, I feel energized to be able to talk about these kinds of things, and seeing the way that they tie together, and being able to genuinely learn from the folks in the chat with new ideas or incremental ideas has helped me, today evolve the way that I think about these things. And so it's one of the great things about this is being able to continuously learn new ways to do it, because we've made plenty of these mistakes within our own organization, despite the fact that we preach them. And so I appreciate the opportunity to learn from everyone.
Guilty of the same. Nicole?
Yeah, I love just the interconnectedness of the idea of how we show up at work every day and our ability to execute on huge things. So digging into all of that is so complex and so exciting. So I think that obviously is exciting for me. And I love seeing some old friends in the chat. Looking forward to reconnecting with some of those folks.
Fantastic. Best thing for me was reminding myself I need to keep learning. And one of the pieces that we believe in with all of our hearts as a little community of folks at JLC, and certainly in the world, the best leaders are ones that are constantly learning. Constantly learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually said this to someone yesterday: if you could look back 10 years and look at yourself today, you should be really, really happy with the human being that is unfolding now. So I would say that to the three of you and work on saying it to myself. Thank you. You have mission control, Nicole.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. Look forward to sending out the recording and some additional details about our offer to each one of you. And I think we have some surprise resources as well. So we'll send those out and we'll talk with you soon.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.